So that was a lot of build-up, but gives you the best kind of overall mapping for how I'm thinking about organizing the mannequin or the figure in shapes. Some steps in case you're like me and you kind of want something to orient your development of these figures and how they might begin to evolve. But now I think you're at a place where you could start to look and aim them at things that might interest you. Or if you have a broader goal in mind in terms of things that you would want to do with your figures or your effort made toward learning figure drawing, that you're going to be able to. And so that's what I want to start to play with right now. And so all I did was just take my kind of little mannequin guy and move it down as something to be like a signpost, a roadmap, just a basic overall reminder of what we set up and what we're trying to do with it. But I'm not looking to continue to use it in the exact same way that we might see it here. Instead, I want to think about ways that the body maybe deviates from it, and then specifically why. Again, my point of reference here is the history of American illustration, and what I'm looking at, or what interests me about it, and really art history, more broadly, is why bodies changed. What was the reasoning that one period looked different than another? Why were bodies presented the way they were? Why did that presentation filter into art making in a way that was so specific for so long? And then as we kind of think about that, we can begin to also make some drawings, using the same template for thinking a figure. So let's start by having some fun making a drawing and just say, well, let's try to draw a different body type. So let's do our part, just as a reminder here real quick. So part is the head, position is that it's tilted and bowed. So we have this kind of shape. So I'm not doing the operation of tilt, showing the cross. This is where I think this part of this way of drawing can be a little bit tricky, is that I'm giving you less in terms of how I'm showing you develop or showing its development. But I'll try to be clear here in the narration of it so that you don't feel too lost. But this is the turn. The turn is the movement of the chin toward one side, and that insinuates the center line has pushed over. Here is the tilt. The tilt is also reflected in the lines on the outside. The last part would be the perspective, and that's the brow to the ear, so there's a low perspective vanish. So that's part, gesture. I didn't do much modification, although you could. Houdini has a weird haircut, right? That makes his head feel really broad up top. That's interesting, because that would start to kind of borrow on or feel like it has some of that more dominant or aggressive qualities that we looked at in the brute, kind of broaden that shape up top. Okay, part, gesture, perspective. Next, the neck. The gesture of the neck's kind of buried back in here, so I don't see a whole lot of it. Maybe this. And so maybe you're thinking, well, why is this guy talking about Houdini? Like, who even is that? So this is one of our famous magicians in American culture. The reason he was thought to be masculine, or these three types were, was because we're dealing with a period in history where we're transitioning thinking of labor. We're thinking of labor from agricultural to industrial. And that conflict is played out on the surface of the male body in the way that it's seen. What does Houdini do in his early tricks? He's stripped bare by a squad of police, tied in chains, and then through an act of magic escapes from that bondage. And that's very consistent as a story in male archetypes in this period of American culture. So we have our head, we have our neck, and now we can see the posture of a constrained individual. So now I want to try to match the gesture of that to this. So here's a tilt. Maybe I'll start with that. I'm going to start with my tilt. Looks like it's slightly higher on that shoulder, a little bit lower here. This is bent forward. So the basic idea of this tube would be that it's bending forward. So there's a pinch in this direction. So that's going to be, let's bring an S curve off that neck down. So we just kind of magically create our trap. Where's my center line? I think, it's going to be down here, somewhere in the area of the neck. This is bent forward. So I'm pinching my tube forward, and this is stretched. This goes down into the pelvis. And then it's hard because here there's these large shorts, right? But this feels kind of like a burdened posture. So I've used that. I'm not dealing too much with modifying any of these shapes yet because it's more or less pretty realistic in terms of the body type. So there's really no need. I'm just doing some cleanup lines. This line tells me that it's rotated. So this is a 3/4 torso. This is, let's say, a pinch across to create some kind of pinch stretch. Whereas in the first discussion, we talked about pinch stretch from side to side. Maybe, gosh, where would there be more weight here? Maybe there's more weight on this side, hard to say. So that drops forward. So this would be going, perspective would be last. Maybe this leans forward. Maybe this slightly tilts back. There we go through the belly button or stomach. So there's our tube shape, right? It doesn't have to be, again, to contrast our last approach, rib cage, build all the muscles up. Again, we're already at a silhouette, and I could use some anatomy knowledge on top of this to show anatomy where it needs to be shown, right? But maybe another thing that's confusing is a lot of times if you're doing characters or figures, not everybody is naked all the time. So you don't need anatomy everywhere. If it's a heroic character, where do you need anatomy? Shoulders, chest, abs maybe, legs maybe, right? So we maybe only need to think about anatomy in pinpoint areas for people, for groups. So there's that. Now let's do a leg. So leg, I want to start to build off the side. So here's my leg. I'm thinking of it beginning here. And then let's set up the shape to maybe start somewhere there. And I like to begin with the weight-bearing leg, but you could do whatever you want. It's pretty straightforward. So maybe I'll do a B, and then I'm going to bring that knee out a little bit and then back in. Again, this doesn't need to be the contour. It's just my template to get started. So that would be here. Here's just kind of going back with some dark lines on top so that it reads a little bit better. I'm thinking of this as being relatively straight, so that's why I went with the B. I'm going to add in maybe some landmarks just to give myself some areas to think through. Like that patella helps me because it's at that roughly at that halfway point. But otherwise, I like to kind of gesture in my shape and then clean it up with lines afterwards, frame it, outline it, and then think about its parts and how they connect. So this connected here, that gives me a little overlap to the pelvis. Here's the center line, that kind of flows into the inside of that leg. And then let's do the other leg. Well, maybe this leg kind of kicked out a little bit. Feels to me like there might be a little less weight here. So again, I'm going to bring that up on the pelvis, think about its attachment across, still front, but this feels a little bit out. And here's the ground plane. So the foot's just a continuation of that and back. So I guess you could say that I've never been really too much interested in the adoration of the artist for the kind of the heroic effort of creativity that gave, the artistic expression, and more the political and social forces that drove that individual to express or to create. So I see the individual as a reaction to that and less as an autonomous kind of artistic author. And that's how I tend to look at most things here. So maybe this could be our leg. I'm still going to think of that as having some kind of rhythmic connection off the center. And then lastly for our arms, so these are definitely tied in a way that are behind. So let's think of that. So here's where it's going to attach. So that's where my arms begin. The gesture for these will just be a curved tube that goes back. Honestly, that I think is really what I would have to add or offer that is new, right? Or maybe less discussed, because I think everybody has a lot of information as far as how to draw something, the way something's drawn. But we could always probably use more perspective on what to do with it or why we might draw it. So here's my connection for arms. Sometimes I just like to throw in that like more abrupt start-stop. This is the part. The gesture is that it's bent. The perspective is that it's going back. And then done. So that would be just one example of the lay-in approach based on what I see here. But I'm trying to add or backfill with all of that additional information. Oh, and then we'd also have if we wanted to add the lower part of the arm, we could do the same thing. So that goes back this way. This one is a little bit harder, but that would go behind the torso as it leans forward there. And then as we progress, what do we start to see in terms of American illustration and the development or usage of the male archetype? Well, once we kind of get past here, we start to move into Leyendecker. Leyendecker has the arrow collar man, who is definitely a modified version of this.
If you want to learn from Michael, check out his Introduction to Figure Construction and Head Construction courses on Proko.com. Both courses have hours of demonstrations, lectures, and student critiques. If you're interested, click on the links in the description. Thanks.